Tak mulai ya Mas Sigit ya. Nggih, matur nuwun. Ibu Bapak sekalian, selamat sore. Salam sejahtera dan senang sekali bisa berjumpa kembali di forum Bincang Bulanan Urip Iku Urub yang telah kita selenggarakan sejak bulan Desember tahun 2021. Sekarang kita sudah tiba di penyelesaian 7 bersama narasumber kita dan ahli Raden Saleh, yaitu Pak Werner Kraus. Pak Werner akan memaparkan salah satu cuplikan dalam buku Urub terkait dengan seni rupa negara, sebuah awal mula penemuan nasionalis semasa pergerakan. Disinilah syair dari Khairil Anwar yang bulan depan akan kita rayakan sahabatnya bisa kita temui bersama, di mana di masa pergerakan, di saat pembangunan nasional waktu itu, Diponegoro hidup kembali. Tuan hidup kembali, tulis Khairil Anwar. Nah, Pak Werner akan mengetengahkan bagaimana sih visualisasi Diponegoro itu memberikan nyawa, memberikan spirit bagi era pergerakan kita. Pada kesempatan kali ini, ada Mas Daya Negeri Wijaya, seorang sejarawan dari Departemen Sejarah Universitas Negeri Malang yang baru saja mendapatkan gelar doktoralnya dari Universidade do Porto, Universitas Porto di Portugal. Beliau akan mendampingi untuk penerjemahan materi. Forum ini merupakan kerjasama antara Penerbit Buku Kompas, Karavan Cendekia, kelompok peneliti, kemudian dibantu oleh, di sini ada Mas Sigit dari Tribunnews. Tayangan ini juga muncul dalam kanal YouTube Tribunnews. Kemudian bersama dengan Masyarakat Sejarawan Indonesia, Komisaris Jawa Timur, dan kita juga dibantu oleh teman-teman dari kelompok diskusi Sujat Moko yang berada di Malang, Solo, dan Jogja. Tanpa menunggu lagi, kita akan menyapa Pak Werner. Pak Werner? Good afternoon, Pak. Pak Werner Kraus merupakan sejarawan yang menguasai bidang seni rupa di Asia Tenggara dari Universitas Passau. Beliau menamatkan studi doktoralnya di Universitas Cornell dan telah menerbitkan buku Raden Saleh, Kehidupan dan Karyanya di Penerbit Kepustakaan Populer Gramedia pada tahun 2018. Beliau juga merupakan kurator pada pameran Raden Saleh tahun 2012 di Galeri Nasional dan juga merupakan kurator di pameran besar Aku Diponegoro tahun 2015 juga di Galeri Nasional bersama kurator Jim Supangkat dan sejarawan Peter Carey. Daya Negeri Wijaya mungkin bisa membantu menyapa Pak Werner. Pak Werner, are you okay with your PowerPoint? Is it fixed or how is it going, Pak? Kita masih menunggu Pak Werner yang PowerPoint-nya. Pak Werner sendiri tulisan dalam buku Urip Iku Urub, bagaimana sih persinggungan antara visualisasi Diponegoro dengan masa pergerakan nasional, dan dilukiskan juga bagaimana represi pemerintah kolonial bagi pergerakan Oh, Pak Werner barusan keluar dan ini baru masuk lagi.
Okay,
Ya.
okay. Sorry, here I am.
Ya, thank you, Pak.
Somehow my internet is not very good here, but I hope now we can start, okay?
Ya, Pak. Is it okay,
Yeah.
Pak? Daya will assist you. We are
Hello,
welcome also, Pak.
Everybody, I'm sorry about being late. It's very early here in the morning, and I hope you are all okay. Unfortunately, the PowerPoint is also not working. You see, I'm a beginner. I'm really bad in all these new technologies because I'm an old man, and you have to understand it. But I will give you, I think, a quite interesting talk on Diponegoro as a national hero. I would like to talk about I would like to explore the changing perceptions of Pangeran Diponegoro within the different groups of the emerging Indonesian national movement and beyond. You remember the three basic foundations of the Indonesian emancipation movement, the anti-colonial movement in Indonesia, were socialism, communism, agama, and nationalism. The first organizations that developed at the beginning of the 20th century were in fact regional organizations like Budiodomo, Young Java, Young Sumatra. These organizations were not striving for an Indonesian nation state, but more for regional autonomy or regional interests. The next step of the development in the emancipation movement was not from regional to national organizations, but strange enough, from regional organization to international organization. Remember the Indonesian Communist Party, PKI, also Sarekat Islam, they were not striving for a nation state. The communists were striving for an international community of workers, while Sarekat Islam was striving for an more or less international Ummah Islam and not for a national state. This only happened with the third aliran, with nationalism. For the first time, and more or less under the leadership of Karno, it was understood that the future of Indonesia as a nation state should be a nation within the former or the existing colony of Netherlands, Indies. It is interesting to see that all of these alirans I mentioned, all of them strove for Diponegoro as a national hero. All of them accepted him as a pahlawan nasional. And I think this is because the inner characteristics of Diponegoro, as understood by this time, by the Indonesian, these inner characteristics like courage, resistance, and the will to fight colonialism, this was understood as the soul of a new emerging Indonesian nation. After Diponegoro had passed away in 1855, he was, at least in Dutch colonial society, as well as in the modern segment of Indonesian society, more or less forgotten. The Java War between 1825 and 1830 was history. It was a time past, a time when people used to do things in a different way. Now in 1855, when Diponegoro died, there were steamboats plying the Java Sea. There was new agricultural technologies developed, new technologies of exploitation the country, and new accountant system. So the whole world had changed, and nobody had the idea that a Javanese prince from Yogyakarta could threaten Dutch military and economic power. This was more or less unthinkable. But, and we have to be aware of that, Diponegoro was forgotten by the Dutch on the surface, but down deep in their subconscious, the Dutch were still afraid of development like Diponegoro could happen again. In April 1849, it was reported in Dutch newspapers that a certain Bangaran Arjo Rongo from Yogyakarta, he was a brother of Diponegoro. It was recorded that this brother tried to organize an alliance of Javanese princes in order to bring Diponegoro back from Makassar back to Jogja and establish him again as Sultan of Yogyakarta. Of course, the Dutch found out Harjo Ronge was arrested and sent to Semarang in jail. A couple of years later, again, a member of the family of Diponegoro, this time his grandson Raden Mas Dibo Atmojo. He was arrested as the head of a Rambok party near Semarang. And when the Dutch asked him why he was breaking into houses and taking things away that did not belong to him, he answered, "Sir, I can rob and take away whatever I like in this country. No European possession is safe, not even the house of the resident." In his perception, in the perception of Mas Dibo Atmojo, it was the Dutch and the allies, the Chinese. The Dutch were the real Orang Rambok, since they had robbed the Javanese of their land and nation. It is now interesting to see that the Dutch did not dare to sentence him to death like they would have done with any other Rambok people. Rambok people were usually more or less killed immediately. But the Dutch argued the locals, that is the Javanese, are of the impression that a man who is closely related to the blood of Bangaran Diponegoro should not end his life on the gallows. His life was spared, and the colonial public was really furious about that. So we see Diponegoro was still alive within the colonial society, not on the open, but down in the subconsciousness of the government and maybe also the Dutch civilians. But of course, we know, and this is more or less my field, that Raden Saleh finished this very famous historical painting about the arrest of Diponegoro in 1857. 2 years after the death of Diponegoro. And of course, it was influenced, the painting was influenced by the fact that Diponegoro had died in Makassar. Radensal's family was very close to Diponegoro. When he had almost finished his painting, he invited a Dutch journalist and showed him his work. The painting, as we know, is called The Arrest of Pangeran Diponegoro. But the Dutch critic in 1857 did not even see an arrest. He called it a departure. What he saw was a kind of departure party for Diponegoro while he was arrested in Magalan and taken to Semarang. He had no idea about the whole this historical situation. He did not understand anymore that this was one of the traumatic actions the Dutch took against the Indonesian resistance movement, that the arrest of Diponegoro was one of the worst things that happened during the 19th century, because Diponegoro was not defeated. He was deceived. He was tricked into a meeting and then arrested. But as I said, by 1857, this young Dutch journalist did not even remember that Diponegoro was arrested. He thought he was taken more or less on a party to Semarang. Okay, this is history, 19th century history, but now I would like to move into the 20th century, into the times of the development of the Indonesian national movement that finally was found its end in Indonesian national independence in 1945. In political communications, it is a crucial aspect to have a hero. You need a hero in order to rally the people behind your cause. Sometimes these heroes are invented. Sometimes they are real, but transferred into a kind of imagined hero. I mentioned already that before the national movement started, we had this regional development, like Burjodomo, or also the so-called Indische Partei of Douwe Stekker, sometimes also called the Insulinde Partei. And as far as I could research, for the first time that Diponegoro was entering the political discourse, the historical political discourse in Indonesia. This happened at the Insulinde Congress of 1913 in Semarang. Insulinde was a follow-up organization of the Indische Partei, which was, of course, forbidden, and its leaders were exiled to Holland. At this Insulinde Congress in Semarang, 1913, it was a certain Mr. Reichen from Mr. Cornelis from Jatinegara who delivered a speech on Diponegoro. The title of his speech was Diponegoro, a Javanese freedom fighter. Up to now, Diponegoro in the Dutch colonial press was always connected with a rebel. He never was called a freedom fighter. So for the first time in the colonial public, somebody dared to call Diponegoro a freedom fighter. This speech by Reichen was later printed as a booklet, and this booklet was sold for many, many years. Even in the 1930s, you still could buy it in Yogyakarta. So more than 15 years after it was printed. There was a real interest in the Indonesian public to know more about Diponegoro, not from the Dutch historical side, but from the side of an Indonesian nationalist. At another convention of the same organization of Insulinde, the Congress in 1918 in Bandung, for the first time, a portrait of Diponegoro was produced and hung on the wall, was placed on the wall of the meeting hall. This was the first time I read about the use of political posters within the political discourse within the emerging nationalist movement. It would be now, at least for me, it would be really interesting to find a photograph of this poster and maybe even find out by some sort of signature who did paint in 1918, yes, who did paint portraits of Pangeran Diponegoro. As we know, Indonesian art history, usually we think it started with Bersaki movement in the 1930s. Yeah, so all the local Indonesian art histories I have read, they more or less start out maybe with Moi India, but they start out with Bersaki and think that was the beginning of Indonesian art history. But here we see many years before, there have been Indonesians. Can we call them artists? I don't know, because we have no photographs, who painted portraits, huge portraits of Pangeran Diponegoro that were hang up on the wall. You know, this is not an easy thing. This is quite complicated, technological, artistic task. But anyway, we don't know. We have no photographs, we have no signature, we have no names, not yet. But I try to find out, and if I found out, I will tell you. I think it's very important. Then I move on to the next phase of Indonesian national resistance movement. And this was more or less dominated by the young Communist Party, which was founded in the 1970s in Java. And the idea of Diponegoro as a folk hero was taken now further and was developed further by the Communist Party. For them, Diponegoro was not some Javanese prince who fought colonialism. For them, Diponegoro was a leading figure in the anti-imperialistic movement, and he was set as primus inter pares in a long line of communist heroes like Karl Marx and Trotsky, Liebknecht, and all these people. So for the Indonesian Communist Party, Raden Saleh fitted in this history of struggle against colonialism, against imperialism, international imperialism. In one article, the chairman of the PKI in March 8, 1970, he wrote, I have the quote here, that Diponegoro has to be accepted as an example of international communist ideal leaders. He said, he was a very special person. Since his death, no other Javanese leader has fought for the rights of the people so effectively. And during the big strikes, the communists organized big strikes in Surabaya in April 1918, very early, workers carried banners with the slogan, "Workers of Surabaya, spring to action, fight against injustice, and go forward with the courage and the spirit of Diponegoro." So on these banners, you couldn't see Trotsky or Lenin or Marx, you saw Diponegoro. Yeah. And during the convention of the Communist Party, PKI in Semarang, 1921, was one of the big ones. The hall was decorated with lots of portraits, again painted posters, again we don't know who did them, painted posters, and we saw Lenin and Trotsky, Karl Marx, but as well Diponegoro, Sendot, and Kiai Mocho, so his friends and followers during the Java War. It is true that Dan Malaka, the most intellectual and most experienced leader of early Indonesian communist movement, mentioned in his publication Masa Aksi, that was published in 1926, Dan Malaka mentioned that Diponegoro was not a good model for a proletarian hero, since he struggled, according to Dan Malaka, basically for aristocratic privileges and not for the welfare of the common people. But by this time, this was not relevant any longer, since by 1926, Diponegoro was already established as an Indonesian national hero. And I will give you some example how that happened and how that worked in the public sphere. Now I go on and move to the nationalist movement, to the third Ali round, the nationalists. And I start out with a letter written, an open letter written by Suvandi Suryaningrat, the founder of the Damansiswa, Ki Hacha Devandoro. Hacha Devandoro wrote on February 8, 1923, quite early, "Dear brothers, for all of us, the date of February 8 is of utmost importance. This is the day of commemoration, a day of mourning for us native Indonesians. It is the day when Diponegoro died in Makassar, especially for the Javanese. Why is that though? Because the great Pangeran Diponegoro died on that day. On 8th February, in fact, it was 8th January, but by this time, historical research was not yet clear about the date. Only much later, it was established that it was the 8th of January, 1855. He said, on 8th February, 1855, our hero passed away in Makassar, where he had been exiled. Let's commemorate his day, this day in sadness. Let's stop for a while our work and have minutes of silence in schools and workplaces. Please pass on this information to all our friends and brothers." So this is the start of developing Diponegoro as a national hero in the public. Yeah, before at certain body convention or meetings, we had these posters, but you could not really see Diponegoro in the Indonesian public. Now, from this day on, every 8th of February was celebrated by the non-governmental government schools by the private schools, like Daman Sisma schools, Sarkadraya schools, whatever. There are many, many private schools at this time, was celebrated as the Hari Diponegoro. And the schools were closed and the children were organized marches and so on and so on. So it started out with Ki Acha Devandoro, who was not really a political leader, but a very, very influential cultural national leader at this time. As I said, the Indonesian followed his call. February 8th was celebrated as a local holiday, and Diponegoran's presence in the schools, in school classes, increased from that time on. In 1925, 2 teachers of Sarkadraya school near Salatiga were suspended and arrested because their classroom was adorned with a portrait of Diponegoro, a practice followed by many Daman Siswa schools. They all put up in the school classes portraits of Diponegoro. In fact, a reader of the Daman Siswa magazine, Busara was the name of the monthly magazine, a very interesting historical source. You can find it at the archive of the Daman Siswa Center in Yogyakarta. Very, very important source. One of the readers of Busara, he came from Purwokerto, asked the Daman Siswa leadership if it is permissible to hang up a portrait of Diponegoro on the walls of the Daman Siswa schools. The answer of the leadership was Boleh dan baik, permissible and recommended. The second part of the question was, of the man from Purwokerto was, is it also permissible to hang up a photograph of Sukarno? And then the Daman Sisma said, no, this is not allowed, because Sukarno is still alive and we do not know how his character will develop. So we cannot hang it up on the wall and make him to one of the big examples of the Indonesian people, like Diponegoro, because we still don't know how this guy is going to develop. So I find it a very interesting and very reasonable answer to this question. This practice of honoring Diponegoro, especially in the school, it took effect. It was recorded that a primary teacher from a school in West Java provoked loud protests from the children in his class when he followed the Dutch curriculum in the school class and called Diponegoro a disloyal rebel. So this was, of course, the Dutch word for Diponegoro, but the kids, I mean, that was a primary school, between 6 and 10 years, they protested against their own teacher, and that for us, Diponegoro is not a rebel, but he is one of our very much beloved leaders. That was in 1928 already. So you see the esteem of Diponegoro developed very, very fast and went right down to a primary school class in West Java, somewhere in the province. You know, very amazing. While the Dutch colonial government in the early days did not really react to the promotion of Diponegoro as a national hero, they did not understand it. Maybe they have not seen the strength of the movement yet. But later on in the 1920s, it changed, especially after 1926, after the communist rebellion in West Java. By this time, the Dutch Indies governments began to be headed by even more conservative figures. One of them was Governor General Cornelis de Jong. He was in office between 1931 and 1936, a very, very conservative and very strict Governor General. And he was really going after the national movements like nobody before him. It seems that Diponegoro at this time was not only established in the school class on the walls, but it is reported in Dutch newspapers that in the villages around Yogyakarta, in certain kampongs of Yogyakarta, weekly rehearsals were organized of Javanese folk plays, known as Wayang Kedoprak, and some of these plays used revolutionary stories. They used stories from the Java War, and of course, Diponegoro was one of the heroes in these folk theater stories. And the local authorities were not amused and asked the police to stop further staging of this kind of play. So the Dutch, by the 1930s, got afraid a little bit of the developing image of Diponegoro as a national hero that could unite many different alirands of Indonesian colonial movement, anti-colonial movement. Towards the end of 1929, the battle of the colonial government against the nationalists geared up, and Diponegoro, whose image and memory had now been adopted by Sukarno, was made even more visible. Sukarno, as we know, was this brilliant orator. He let no opportunity pass by to remind the people of their own heroic past, and he very often reflected of the Java War. On 1st February 1929, a bonfire in commemoration of Diponegoro's death date was organized in Bandung by the local Boy Scout group, by the Partai Nasional Indonesia, BNI Boy Scout group. Sukarno was invited, turned up, and at this rather emotional and rather well-organized meeting, he narrated the biography of Diponegoro to the children, to the Boy Scouts, and he did it in a kind of traditional hikayat style. So he was very clever, and he knew how to reach the people. And he told the story of Diponegoro as a kind of national epos, as a modern Ramayana. Yeah, Diponegoro was introduced as a modern hero of national epos. In the forefront of the Diponegoro cult stood Pemuda Indonesia. It's always like that. It's always the young people, the organization of the youth of organization of the party. These are always the one who are in the forefront. They have much more spirit. They have nothing to lose. They are much more free than we old people. And also in this case, it was Pemuda Indonesia that carried the Diponegoro cult to another level. When they held the National Convention in 1929 at the Daman Siswa building in Kramat Raya in Batavia, again, a very large portrait of Diponegoro was placed in the hall. And it was not only a portrait, but it was surrounded by flowers and rosettes and whatever, red and white garlands. So it was almost like the image of a holy person, you know, not just a poster, but now it was much more celebrated, much more organized, much more put into the open. At the same convention, a man from Surabaya brought with him a large painted portrait of Diponegoro. Up to now, we had posters of Diponegoro, but now we had a painting, oil on canvas, portrait of Diponegoro. That was 1929. Well, the first time I can recall it, that a real piece of art connected to Diponegoro, after Ransale's wonderful painting, was seen in the public. Unfortunately, although the artist of this painting is not known, the painting is not known anymore, we have no photographs. But as I said before, we really have to rethink Indonesian art history. It goes further back in the Indonesian history, and is so much more connected with the national movement as we are aware of today. You know, we have to find a new beginning of and a new way of looking at the foundations of Indonesian art history. As I said before, I think it's very much connected with the national movement, much more as we thought. And it is much older than the beginning of Suchoyono or people like that. It has roots that going further back into Indonesian history. Yeah, and there was the colonial government not really got afraid. They really didn't know how to handle the situation anymore. Diponegoro was just getting too big for them, you know. And I found a rather depressing note in a newspaper, Badawian newspaper, published in March 1929. I read the translated message of the, what was it, Batavia's Newsblad. This morning opened in the prison of Pandeglang with a dull and hollow sound of the trapdoor opening under the feet of Abdul Hadi, the murderer of the Vedana of Menes. Abdul Hadi was sentenced to death because the Dutch claimed that he was a murderer of the Vedana of Menes during the communist insurrection in West Java in 1928. And then it goes on. Abdul Hadi was in his life an admirer of Diponegoro. And now this journalist points to the national movement and says, may this be a living reminder for young Java and for the PNE. So he more or less threatens the national movement with ending up on the gallows like Abdul Hadi. This was a real bizarre threat, but it was not respected by the Indonesian people. Only 2 months after the execution of Abdul Hadi, a second BNE Congress in May 29 in Batavia was staged, and again a huge portrait of Diponegoro was placed on front of the wall of the meeting hall. You see your ancestors, your fathers, grandfathers have been very courageous people. They did not stand down just because of the Dutch threats, you know. They kept on the fight, and luckily in the end, successfully. By this time, it seemed almost impossible to organize some sort of national event, nationalist event, without the presence of Diponegoro. During an evening in commemoration of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the first president of the Republic of China, who had passed away in 1925, 2 large portraits. This evening was organized by the PNE. 2 large portraits decorated the PNE building in Bandung. One, of course, of Sun Yat-sen, and next to it, a portrait of Diponegoro. So again, Sun Yat-sen, the hero of the Chinese nationalist movement, was put on the same level with Diponegoro. But it was not only the nationalists, the PNE, the secular nationals, but Muhammadiyah as well used Diponegoro on their posters. So when the Muhammadiyah Congress was organized in 1931, there was also made a huge poster using the portrait of Diponegoro. Unfortunately, I was not able to play my PowerPoint, and I could show you this poster now. It shows Diponegoro who points to the Masjid Agung in Yogyakarta, and he is more or less a copy of the early portraits we know of Diponegoro. So Diponegoro was also taken up as a national hero by the early religious movement, the Muhammadiyah. And though we have again, here's the circle closes, it was the socialists, the nationalists, and the religious movement, all of them respected Diponegoro, and all of them worked for him to create him as a national hero. You know, I'm interested in art history, in Indonesian art history, and this poster of the Muhammadiyah, it is at least, it is signed. It is signed by Sirat, S-E-R-A-A-D, Sirat. I have tried to find out who or what is Sirat, and I was not really successful. Was it a person? Was it a design studio? Or is it just a Dutch word for jewel? Sirat in Dutch means jewel. So I don't know. I just found out that a certain Haji Sirat Dahlan was mentioned as a member of the Muhammadiyah steering committee around the same time. So maybe it's connected to the production of the poster is connected to this Haji Sirat Dahlan. We don't know. Again, these are some secrets that have to be introduced in early Indonesian art history. And this early Indonesian art history does not know anything about early poster production in Java. So I don't know whoever did any work on that. Unfortunately, we have still a kind of desert here. And hopefully young Indonesian researcher will go more into the history of their own, of the development of their own arts. In about 1935, and I'm almost through my talk, the repression reached another level. In Yogyakarta, all Diponegoro meetings were forbidden by the police. Non-government schools were now forced to stop treating the 8th February as a national holiday, and they were forced to open the schools during these days. The people reacted with a kind of inner migration. Instead of celebrating huge meetings, bonfires, they went by the hundreds to Goa Selarong. Goa Selarong, you may remember, was a meditation place of Diponegoro, south of Yogyakarta. So instead of staging political demonstrations, they went to Goa Selarong for meditation, for communal mass meditation. Yeah. You see, it's always the same story. The government tries to stop the people's aspiration, and the people time and again found a way to beat the regulations of the police. This is one of the very beautiful things about the Indonesian national movement. If you really go into it, you see whatever the colonial government tried to stop it, they found a new response. Yeah, so they were never defeated by the police actions. One incident I have to report before I stop, since it reminds me about the darkest hour of my home country. I live in Germany. The burning of books done by the fascists here in Germany. A Surabaya newspaper published in October 1938 the following message. The life of Diponegoro, books burned. The political secret service of Surabaya has, as we have been told, a number of books on the life of Diponegoro published by Pemuda Sarekat Islam Indonesia, stopped to be sold and burned about 400 of them. Colonialism and fascism had the same fondness of burning the opinions of the opponents, and even democratic systems like today seem to be unable to tolerate dissenting interpretations of certain symbols. And here, of course, I like to remind you of what happened to Ruang Ruba, a documenta, over the last 2 weeks. You know, it's a shame. I'm so ashamed as a German how this could happen, how Ruang Rupa and Daring were treated, Daring Party were treated by the by German politics and by the press and whatever. And we tried to organize an opposition movement to that, and we'll hope to publish some open letters to our president and politicians to support Ruang Rupa, which I experience as very serious, as very engaged people. They should not be treated like that, not be treated like they're treated now. This is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Pak Werner, for your speech and talk. And I will a little bit try to give some summary for my friends in this meeting, and back to you again in the question and answer session or discussion session a little bit. Bapak Ibu dan rekan-rekan yang saya hormati, tadi Pak Werner sudah memberikan paparan terkait perubahan persepsi dari Pangeran Diponegoro dalam beberapa kelompok pergerakan nasional. Jadi menurut saya pribadi apa yang dipaparkan oleh Pak Werner sangat menarik, dan mungkin saya jarang membaca karya-karya sejarawan Indonesia itu yang bagaimana mengkontekskan lukisan dalam konteks yang sejaman, yakni dalam konteks Pak Werner adalah pergerakan nasional. Lukisan Raden Saleh dalam pergerakan nasional seperti apa, dan beliau memulai paparannya dengan memperlihatkan pada kita bahwa Diponegoro ya memang pahlawan nasional. Tetapi yang paling mengejutkan ternyata ada 3 fondasi ideologi yang sangat berbeda pada waktu itu, pada pergerakan nasional, yang ternyata menyepakati bahwa memang Diponegoro juga pahlawan nasional. Hal ini tergambar dari 3 ideologi yang menyepakati keberadaan Diponegoro sebagai pahlawan adalah sosialisme, agama, dan juga nasionalisme, yang tadinya berkembang dari regionalisme hingga menjadi nasionalisme dan kemudian berkembang menjadi internasionalisme. Dan juga ada paham-paham transnasionalisme yang kemudian juga dipaparkan oleh Pak Werner. Jadi beliau memulai dengan mengetengahkan bahwa pada saat pemerintahan Hindia Belanda itu sangat takut jika Diponegoro baru itu bermunculan, karena banyak orang yang kemudian sangat terinspirasi dari sosok Diponegoro dan juga Perang Jawa yang begitu membekas di hati masyarakat, terutama pada abad 19 dan juga 20. Hal ini oleh Pak Werner diberikan contoh tentang kisah dari Pangeran Haryo Rongge pada tahun 1849. Beliau mencoba untuk melakukan pemberontakan. Serta kemudian ada lagi Raden Mas Dipo Atmojo pada tahun 1875 juga merencanakan rampokan macan. Tetapi kemudian nama Diponegoro itu tidak tertulis dalam koran di Jawa antara tahun 1855 dan 1910. Tetapi kemudian Raden Saleh, seorang pelukis yang sangat luar biasa, hadir untuk mengetengahkan pada kita tentang lukisan bersejarah penangkapan Diponegoro yang kemudian diapresiasi oleh beberapa kritikus seni. Tetapi kemudian Belanda tidak paham ternyata terkait dengan pesan dari lukisan dari Raden Saleh itu. Jadi pemerintah mengundang kritikus Belanda untuk melihat apa sebenarnya pesan dari lukisan Raden Saleh tersebut. Ternyata mereka juga nggak paham apa sebenarnya pesan dari lukisan Raden Saleh. Para kritikus Belanda itu melihat lukisan Raden Saleh itu hanya memiliki pesan keberangkatan Diponegoro dari Magelang ke Semarang. Tetapi sebenarnya khalayak lokal memahaminya itu sebagai penangkapan Diponegoro. Jadi ketidakpahaman ini yang kemudian membuat berbagai kalangan pergerakan, kaum pergerakan untuk memakai lukisan Diponegoro ini sebagai figur, model, teladan perjuangan mereka. Dalam Kongres Insulinde 1913, Budi Utomo, itu para elitnya juga menggunakan Diponegoro sebagai motivasi dan model mereka dalam memperjuangkan kebebasan, yakni kemerdekaan yang kita pahami. Riken, salah satu elit pada waktu itu, juga membandingkan Diponegoro dengan Willem the Silent, seorang pemberontak pada masa kekuasaan Spanyol, mungkin Habsburg Empire yang pada waktu itu menguasai Nederland. Dan juga pada saat Kongres Insulinde pada tahun 1918, lukisan Diponegoro ini juga diproduksi kembali, serta kemudian begitu dijunjung oleh Douwes Dekker. Diponegoro juga kemudian menjadi sosok pahlawan dan juga kemudian dipromosikan oleh banyak elit PKI, perjuangan PKI, Partai Komunis Indonesia. Orang Jawa itu harusnya menggunakan Diponegoro sebagai model atau teladan dalam menjalani hidup dan kehidupan. Serta kemudian pada saat demo besar Partai Buruh di April 1918 di Surabaya, mereka membawa spanduk yang sangat menarik. Pekerja Surabaya harus beraksi, lawan ketidakadilan, dan maju seberani Diponegoro. Jadi luar biasa sekali bagaimana pada saat itu para pekerja berusaha untuk memakai Diponegoro sebagai kampanye melawan ketidakadilan di Surabaya pada tahun 1918. Demikian pula pada saat konvensi PKI 1921 di Semarang, lukisan Diponegoro sangat luar biasa disandingkan dengan tokoh-tokoh komunis yang internasional, yaitu Lenin dan juga Karl Marx. Tan Malaka sendiri di dalam aksi massa, seperti dipaparkan oleh Pak Werner tadi, juga menyebut Diponegoro sebagai salah satu teladan atau pahlawan proletar dalam bahasanya Tan Malaka. Di dalam bukunya Tan Malaka, yakni Madilog, beliau juga menyebutkan adanya gambaran taman manusia, yakni kebun-kebun yang berisi tugu gambar laki-laki perempuan yang memperjuangkan Indonesia. Diponegoro itu berada pada figur yang berpengaruh. Selain ada Laksamana Hang Tuah, Imam Bonjol, Teguh Umar, Jose Rizal, dan juga Andreas Bonifacio. Dan juga lukisan Diponegoro juga sangat diapresiasi oleh para nasionalis. Suwardi Suryaningrat atau Ki Hajar Dewantoro dalam sebuah surat itu mengajak para koleganya untuk mengenang kematian beliau pada 8 Februari 1855. Jika ada waktu, beliau juga menyarankan agar semua orang itu mengheningkan cipta untuk mendoakan beliau. Orang-orang juga kemudian, orang-orang lokal terutama di daerah sekitar Taman Siswa, merayakan tanggal kematian beliau itu sebagai hari libur. Ini yang kemudian membuat Belanda seperti kebakaran jenggot. Guru Taman Siswa yaitu Bu Sunaryati selalu memberikan petua-petua bagi murid-muridnya dan orang-orang di sekitarnya bahwa kita harus seperti Diponegoro yang berjuang dan selalu percaya bahwa kita dapat mencapai tujuan kita, yakni kemerdekaan dan juga kebebasan. Serta kemudian Pak Werner juga mengetengahkan sejak 1930 kesadaran nasional itu mulai bergema dan massa mulai banyak yang dimobilisasikan. Hal ini terlihat setahun sebelumnya pada rapat PKI atau konvensi PNI 1929 itu banyak para nasionalis yang kemudian membawa lukisan Diponegoro. Bahkan juga Kongres Muhammadiyah juga membawa lukisan pada itu, Diponegoro itu, ketika Kongres di Yogyakarta. Dan kita melihat pada tahun 1935, opresi atau tekanan dari pemerintah Belanda itu mulai berjalan. Seluruh perayaan terkait dengan Diponegoro, kematian beliau dilarang. Dan kemudian banyak orang lokal yang kemudian tidak mau untuk tidak merayakan dan mereka sedikit bermigrasi, berpindah tempat untuk menghindari kejaran pemerintah kolonial ke Goa Selarong yang oleh Pak Werner dikatakan sebagai tempat meditasi dari Diponegoro. Satu hal yang menurut saya sangat menarik bagi kita adalah tadi ketika Pak Werner mengucapkan bahwa the government try to stop the people aspiration and people time to again and found a way to beat regulation. Jadi tadi Pak Werner mengetengahkan bahwa pada saat itu pemerintah itu berusaha untuk menghentikan semua aspirasi dari rakyat, dan rakyat pada waktu itu tetap mencari jalan bagaimana untuk mengakali dan mengatasi dan bahkan menghancurkan regulasi yang dibuat oleh pemerintah itu. Dan pada tahun 1938 ini kita mendapati satu aktivitas atau kegiatan yang sangat menyedihkan yang mengingatkan Pak Werner pada pembakaran buku yang di negaranya kalau nggak salah tadi, yakni pembakaran buku di Surabaya yang menurut beliau sangat menyedihkan, sekitar 400 buku yang dibakar di Surabaya. Ini diharapkan oleh pemerintah dapat melenyapkan memori masyarakat tentang Diponegoro. Tapi kemudian kita tetap mengenang beliau bahkan sampai hingga kini. Dan akhir kata, menurut saya pribadi, apa yang disampaikan oleh Pak Werner tadi sangat penting bagi kita, sejarawan, dan juga rekan-rekan yang sangat antusias pada sejarah untuk memikirkan kembali sebenarnya sejarah seni Indonesia. Kita jarang kemudian melihat bagaimana sejarawan itu mengkontekskan lukisan bersejarah dalam konteks sejarah yang tepat. Itu kira-kira yang summary atau ringkasan yang saya sampaikan, yang saya kutip dari Pak Werner Kraus. So Pak Werner, I have already gave a summary from your speech, so we move on to question and answer session or discussion session. Let me read question from our
Daya.
audience. Yes.
Before that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for kind of giving this overview of the talk. And as I said, I'm very happy to be here with you, and hopefully I can answer some of your expected questions as well. Please.
Thank you. Before we going to discussion session, let me invite Pak Peter Carey. Probably he has some words for us. Pak Peter Carey, are you there?
Ya, saya di sini.
Halo Pak, bagaimana kabarnya Pak?
Baik-baik.
Probably you have
And congratulations.
for us, for Pak Werner as well.
Terima kasih banyak, ya hebat sekali, dan satu privilege untuk mendengar langsung dari Pak Werner sendiri, ya. Ini sesuatu sangat spesial sekali dan sangat menarik, sebab ada banyak tema-tema yang dikembangkan. Ya. Saya bisa merasakan betapa hebat Raden Saleh, ya, di tengah-tengah kemelut kolonial, di tengah-tengah abad 19, dia bisa membuat satu lukisan yang begitu hebat, ya, yang penuh pasemon, ya. Pun perwira yang mengkhianati Diponegoro, Jan Baptist Clarence, dimunculkan di pilar yang paling kiri, sedang menoleh ke yang melihat gambar seperti Judas Iscariot, ya. Dan semua kepala dari Belanda pun dekok, pun dia punya menantu, the steers, semua komandan yang muncul punya kepala yang terlalu besar, ya, untuk badan, ya. Jadi mereka ditontonkan seperti buto sabrang, dan ya kutsir punya cemeti yang patah, ya. Artinya bahwa mungkin menurut Raden Saleh, ya kolonialisme tidak mempan untuk tahan lama, ya. Dan di belakang ada fajar di Gunung Sumbing dan Sundoro, ya. Apa fajar untuk orang pribumi atau fajar untuk Belanda, ya. Ada tanda tanya. Dan di belakang ada kerumunan dari pendukung Diponegoro yang nanti akan menyebar melalui jalan selatan, Pacitan dan Trenggalek, ke Blitar Selatan, ke Blitar dan ke Malang Selatan, untuk bedol desa dan untuk membuka lahan dan komunitas baru. Dan mereka akan menjadi ya seperti inti dari apa yang akan terjadi pada abad 20 ya, di Surabaya, 45, di Pergerakan di Jawa Timur, dan tempat-tempat yang ziarah ya, di tempat seperti Gunung Kawi ya, dan juga trah seperti Bung Karni, cicit dari koki Diponegoro, Onggomerto, yang juga berdiri di Blitar. Ya. Jadi ini syarat pasemon dan syarat ya, petunjuk untuk apa yang akan datang belakangan. Dan saya kira itu salah satu sesuatu yang sangat hebat sekali, seperti orang clairvoyant ya, bisa lihat ya, dan bisa menjawantakan dia punya seni di dalam satu pergerakan anti-kolonial yang begitu pandai diselimuti bahwa orang Belanda tidak bisa melacak. Apalagi seperti kuda Troya ini diberi sebagai hadiah kepada Raja Belanda dan merongrong kekuatan batin dari Belanda dari dalam sedang dipajang di atas Susdijk ya, Istana Belanda. Dan pun Raden Saleh di dalam triptik dari orang yang di tengah-tengah dilihatkan seperti seorang ilmuwan dari abad 19, seorang yang sujud dan seorang yang sedang yang menonton salah satu pengkhianatan seperti Ecce Homini ya, sedang dibisik di telinga apa yang sedang terjadi. Jadi ini sesuatu fonsek origo dari art history dari Diponegoro yang sangat menarik, dan sangat menarik juga bahwa kita punya salah satu potret dari hidup yang dibuat oleh seorang Belanda, Johannes Bick, Jan Bick ya, waktu dia ada di Stadthaus. Dan itu di dalam regalia, dia punya jubah, dia punya serban, dia punya baju koko, dia punya kris Kanjeng Kiai Bondo Yudo yang di dalam ikat pinggang di muka ya, bukan di belakang. Dan belakangan sesudah Perang Jawa itu seperti haram untuk bisa menontonkan atau ditunjukkan Diponegoro di dalam ya busana perang sabil ya. Jadi ini sesuatu yang menarik sebab seorang pelukis, seorang artis yang digembleng sebagai artis untuk porselen, jadi dia bisa dengan kilat menangkap persamaan dari Diponegoro, membuat satu warisan yang begitu berharga dan pada akhirnya menjadi gambar di atas uang kertas dari Republik Muda ya, pada tahun 1952-53 ya, dicetak di Utrecht. Jadi ini satu warisan, dan saya kira kita harus mengakui bahwa Raden Saleh sangat patut menjadi seorang pahlawan nasional, seorang yang betul-betul tahu menahu bagaimana untuk membuat satu alat, satu senjata dari dia punya seni. Dan sudah itu, ya seperti Ki Hajar Dewantoro pernah bilang, sebelum saya hanya ada di Diponegoro ya. Tapi kita kenal Diponegoro melalui gambar dari Raden Saleh. Kalau tidak ada Raden Saleh, tidak mungkin akan ada gaung seperti itu. Ya, ini yang saya sumbangkan. Terima kasih, Werner, my old friend. Ya, sangat berguna sekali, sangat rich sharing. Terima kasih kepada Mas Daya, sekarang Dr. Daya Wijaya, ya, lulusan Oporto, Universitate de Oporto, ya, salah satu kota yang paling yang saya senang di dunia, ya, satu kota yang bersejarah sekali, satu kota yang penuh seni, penuh dengan budaya, di tepi sungai yang membawa ya wine dari Porto untuk dimasukkan di dalam sela, ya. wine yang digemari Diponegoro di atas Pollux, ya, waktu dia dilayarkan dari Batavia sampai ke Manado, ya. Dan terima kasih Mas Sisko, tetap semangat, ya. Ya, sekali merdeka, tetap merdeka.
Persembahan umur Pak Peter Carey, terima kasih. Thank you so much for your inspiration and small talk for us. So let me begin the discussion session with Pak Werner Kraus. So, Pak Werner, are you there? Sorry, technical problem, I think. We will move into our discussion session. So we have 3 questions as I look at the chat box. We have from Heni Purwono. He asked about, is there any relation between Hasan Besari, Kiai Hasan Besari, and Diponegoro?
Well, I think I'm not the right person to answer this question, because this is Peter who should respond to this question, because he's a Diponegoro specialist. I'm more on the Raden Saleh side. So please, Peter, if you can answer.
Okay. Ada 2 Hasan Besari. Salah satu Hasan Besari adalah kakak dari Kiai Mojo yang meninggal secara mengenaskan di bui di bawah tanah pada bulan Januari 1830. Dia ditahan selama hampir setahun, ya, di bawah tanah, dan dia meninggal di Batavia. Tapi ada seorang Kiai Hasan Besari, Pradikan Ageng dari Tegal Sari, yang sebenarnya punya peran waktu perang, ya. Dia baru saja naik dan diangkat sebagai Pradikan Ageng dari Tegal Sari 1820, ya, dan dia hanya meninggal 1862. Dan ada was-was dari pihak Belanda bahwa sebenarnya Hasan Besari punya wewenang, punya pengaruh di dunia pesantren, di dunia peradikan, dusun perdikan, di dunia umat Islam, ya. Jadi dia diawasi oleh seorang Jerman, misionaris Jerman, JFC Herike. Herike adalah seorang misionaris yang membuat studi dari bahasa Jawa dan membuat salah satu kamus yang sangat famous dengan roda, ya, tako roda di Delft. Dan dia punya salah satu tugas untuk mengawasi di Jawa Timur gerak-gerik dari Hasan Besari yang sebenarnya dipakai secara yang terselimuti sebagai orang negotiator dengan Diponegoro, untuk cari apakah ada jalan untuk perdamaian. Tapi dia bukan bisa bergerak bebas selama Perang Jawa, sebab dia dicurigai, diawasi, dan sebenarnya selalu dipantau oleh Herike. Tapi belakangan dia menjadi seorang yang sangat famous sekali, dan Tegal Sari menjadi ternama sebagai Oxford dari Jawa, of the umat Islam di Jawa.
Terima kasih Pak Peter. Saya mungkin mau melanjutkan. Let me continue our discussion session, Pak Werner. We have some comment from audience. We have from Mukova. Thank you, Pak Werner Kraus. Interesting presentation. Terima kasih host. Salam sehat. Then moving to another question from Fajar. He asked, do you have some information related to Raden Saleh? He asked, did Raden Saleh visit Blue Mass in Dresden? And he said, he gave some information that in Semarang there is a village called Bustaman, referring to Bustaman descendant, where Kiai Kertoboso Bustam had grant from some land in Semarang. Probably Pak Peter will discuss about Bustaman Prah Bustaman, and Pak Werner probably will respond. Did Raden Saleh visit Blue Mass in Dresden? Is that correct, Pak Werner?
Well, I don't know if I really got the question, but I would like to add a little bit about the painting of the Arrest of Diponegoro by Raden Saleh. Yeah. Very often, and in some Indonesian publication, Raden Saleh is called as actually as a follower of Dutch colonialism, because the painting Penangkapan Diponegoro he sent to Holland as a gift to the king. Though this very important painting by Raden Saleh was not exhibited in Java, and most probably it was not seen by the Javanese public. Because of that, he very often is accused of being an anak Belanda. But we have to understand, by 1857, there was not a single museum in Batavia, there was no gallery, there was no place where you could exhibit paintings, and certainly there was no place of exhibition where inlanders, local people, Javanese, would be allowed to enter. So there was no chance to show this painting to the Indonesian public. His idea in sending it to the Dutch king was to make the Dutch king aware, or make the Dutch public aware what they have done to the Javanese people at the end of the Java War. It was more or less, the message was more or less, see what you have done to us. That was the message of this historical painting. And I'm not sure, well, I'm pretty sure that the Dutch did not understand, or at least they did not want to understand, though the importance of this painting, Penangkapan Diponegoro by Raden Saleh, developed over the centuries. And I think today it's an icon of Indonesian resistance to the colonial system. And today it is more important than it ever has been in the history. Certainly it was not seen by Indonesians during the 19th century. And can you give me the question again? I almost forgot it.
I think another question is for Pak Peter Carey, I think, about the Bustaman descendant. Fajar said that in Semarang there is a village called Bustaman, referring to Bustaman descendant, where Kiai Kertoboso Bustam had a grant of some land in Semarang. Probably, Pak Peter, do you have some information about Kiai Bustaman or Kiai Kertoboso Bustam?
Ya, informasi yang saya punya adalah bahwa dia sebenarnya punya tanah yang cukup luas, yang sebenarnya diwakafkan atau dihadiahkan oleh VOC, Perserikatan Dagang Hindia Belanda, kepada Kerto Bustaman atas jasa sebagai seorang penerjemah yang bisa bertindak saat perjanjian ganti, ya. Jadi dia adalah seorang kunci untuk pihak Belanda. Dia kerja dengan Harting, Nicholas Harting, gubernur dari pantai timur laut Jawa, yang juga mahir bahasa Jawa. Dan dia di keluarga Bustaman yang datang ke Indonesia melalui India Barat, Surat, menikah dengan bangsawan dan elit Jawa dan menjadi salah satu keluarga terkemuka di areal timur dari Semarang, Terboyo. Dan di Terboyo ada masjid, ada tempat pemakaman, ada kediaman dari ayah angkat dari Raden Saleh, Surya Monggolo kelima, yang menjadi Bupati Semarang, yang seorang sahabat dan seorang collaborator dengan Raffles, yang dia menjabat antara 1809 sampai 22. Dan dia punya satu riwayat yang sangat tragis, juga termasuk dua anaknya, Raden Mas Saleh dan Raden Mas Sukur, yang dulu di SMA di Calcutta, di bawah naungan dari Raffles, yang seperti Mas Daya di Oporto. Mereka lulusan Calcutta, dan mereka datang kembali ke tanah air sebagai orang yang mahir bahasa Inggris, seorang intelektual muda yang harus hidup di salah satu belenggu dari kolonialisme yang sangat kolot, yang dibangunkan kembali oleh Belanda sesudah Jawa dikembalikan pasca Perang Napoleon 19 Agustus 1816, ya, waktu mereka diangkat kembali. Dan dua-duanya, tiga-tiganya, ya, Surya Monggolo sendiri, Raden Mas Saleh, dan Raden Mas Sukur, semua kena imbas dari Perang Jawa. Raden Surya Monggolo dan Raden Mas Saleh ditangkap dan ditahan di atas salah satu kapal perang, dua kapal perang, Pollux dan Maria Regensbergen. Dan pada akhirnya Surya Monggolo meninggal muda, waktu 52 tahun, dan dimakamkan pada awalnya di Terboyo, dan Pragoto, salah satu pemakaman keluarga di tengah-tengah dekat Jalan Bonjol di Semarang. Dan pada akhirnya dia jasadnya dikebumikan kembali di Asta Tinggi di Sumeneb, supaya dia bisa melolos dari salah satu aib, ya, di Jawa. Kalau Raden Mas Saleh sesudah berkeliaran, dia bisa menetap di Semarang dan dia meninggal 1872, dihargai dan direspect. Seperti Raden Saleh sendiri, ada 300 orang yang melayat beliau waktu dia diangkat ke pemakaman keluarga di Terboyo. Dan Raden Mas Sukur yang dikirim ke Ternate dan meninggal di Ternate pasca bulan Maret 1856, ya. Jadi riwayat dari keluarga yang dekat, bapak angkat dan anak-anak, cousins, sangat terasa dan sangat tersentuh oleh Raden Saleh, yang sebenarnya mondok dengan Kiai Surya Monggolo selama 6 bulan pada 1824, waktu dia punya guru dan patron, Payong, ikut dengan Gubernur Jenderal ke Maluku, ke Kepulauan Maluku selama 6 bulan. Jadi dia tahu menau dengan sangat jelas apa sebenarnya nasib dari keluarga yang apes, dan apa sebenarnya asal-usul dari Perang Jawa yang berakar di dalam satu kesengsaraan untuk wong cilik, ya, di mana-mana di Jawa Tengah Selatan, tapi juga di pesisir. Ya, terima kasih.
Daya, there is an answer from Wan Jafar about Raden Saleh and a blue mosque.
I think Pak Werner had already answered it.
Okay.
He don't know about that.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Can I make a comment, a further comment on Raden Saleh and the Busterman family?
Yes.
When Raden Saleh returned to Java in 1852, he very soon reconnected himself to his family. One of his cousins was by this time Bupati in Machalenka. And this Bupati in Machalenka had written a Silsila Busterman, a kind of history of the Busterman family. He had written it in the late 1830s. So all those people who were connected to Diponegoro were not mentioned in the Silsila. This Silsila was published in a Dutch magazine, but in Bahasa Melayu. And it shows that the family was still afraid of Dutch reaction to what has happened during the Java War, as Peter told already, that some of his very close family members actually went over to the side of Diponegoro. But there seems that this public side, like the Silsila that was published, and the people who connected with Diponegoro were not mentioned, is just one picture, just one aspect of the picture. The other aspect is that Raden Saleh was invited to come to Machalenka, and he stayed almost 2 years in Machalenka. And there he not only painted the portraits of the Bupati of Machalenka and his wife, but also designed the kraton. Kraton is maybe a big word for the residence of Bupati, but he designed it, and he designed it in a modern European way. So the kraton was surrounded with gardens in according to the European manner, gardens with more or less botanical gardens with plants you could use for medical treatment and so on. So you see, the Raden Saleh's family was very eager to reconnect to Raden Saleh and make use of his huge experience in Europe. So in a way, we, on the one hand side, we have this official silsila where the Raden Saleh and his family is not even mentioned in the Busterman silsila, but on the other side, when he came back, everybody tried to connect to him very closely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Werner. And we have another question from Kavena and Yabu, Mas Yabu. You have already worked with Raden Saleh painting. Right? So they asked about did Raden Saleh paintings contain some nationalistic message?
I didn't get it. Sorry. A painting.
Did Raden Saleh paintings contain some nationalistic message or another values rather than harassment or?
Yeah, nationalistic, of course not now, because in 1857, the idea of nationalism, even in Europe, was, well, it started to develop, but in the colonial context, nationalism was not a concept anybody would understand. So, but what was understood is anti-colonial resistance. This was there already, it was there all the time. Diponegoro was the climax of this movement. And this anti-colonial resistance, you definitely can see and find in Raden Saleh paintings. If you look very closely, Peter pointed out some aspects already with the big hats of the Dutch military. Also the fact that Diponegoro and General de Kock standing on the same level. An earlier painting done by Bieneman, a Dutch artist, of the same topic, the arrest of Raden Saleh, you see Diponegoro. Diponegoro standing much lower than the Dutch general. Yeah, so the rank is already visible in the painting, but not in the Raden Saleh painting. In the Raden Saleh, it's the same level, and even more. Raden Saleh stands on the right side and the Dutch officer on the left side. In Javanese iconography, this means Raden Saleh is the male and the Dutch general is a female part of this couple, you know. So there are many hidden meanings in these paintings, and meanings which clearly are and strongly point to this anti-colonial spirit of Raden Saleh.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions and still 20 minutes left. So I will move to another question probably from Pak Eka Budianta. Do you know how rich Raden Saleh? Was it 1 or 2 million or trillion or billion? How rich Raden Saleh?
How rich he was. When he died, he owned the Dutch government, according to the present value of money, maybe $50,000. So he had nothing. He owned nothing. He had just debt to the Dutch government. And actually, after he died, the Dutch, I have to say, the colonial government was very greedy when it came to money. They actually invaded his house and wanted to collect as much as they could, paintings, furniture, and all that. But then there was a big resistance from the local people because Raden Saleh's wife was still alive, and she was a lady from the Yogyakarta Kraton. And the people that you cannot do that, you cannot rob the widow of Raden Saleh of her possessions. So in the end, the Dutch government refrained, but some of his paintings were taken, and I guess by the Governor General Landsbergen, and I guess he paid some money to the state coffins for this painting. At least 5 or 6 paintings were collected by the Governor General after Raden Saleh was dead. So he was not a rich man, but he made a lot of money during his life. And like a good Javanese, he spent a lot of money at the same time. You know, he was not into saving; he was into enjoying life. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Raden Saleh was like middle elites or middle man during his life, middle class. I mean. It's not very rich, it's not poor, but in the middle class of Japanese people during at the time.
I don't get the question. Peter, can you help out the question?
So I say that Raden Saleh he was middle class, in the middle class of society, or in the lower class, or in the upper class.
No. It was not lower class and not middle class. He came from a very respected and I would say high class family in Semarang. So he was a member of a family that was connected to many different cultures, like the Pesisir culture, we know, was very strong influenced by the Javanese culture, by Muslim culture, and in a way also by English, European English and Dutch culture by this time. So this was a mix, already a very international, globalized mix of different knowledges that were concentrated in Semarang, and especially in the family of Raden Saleh. You know, so he was a member of the local upper class society.
So it's local.
And a member of the Arabic. We don't have to forget that the Arabic influence in his family was very strong, you know. And his first wife he married in Java. She was the daughter of a German officer and an Arab lady from Palembang. Raden Saleh's sister was married to a Habib from Pontianak. So this connection between this Japanese family and the Arab origins, so this Peranakan Arab, this was very, very strong. Yeah.
So we will move to another question from Pak Asnan, Museum Sandi. He want to know, how did the colonial government respond Muhammadiyah movement that you said earlier? Muhammadiyah used a lot of Diponegoro painting authored by Raden Saleh to provoke their members and followers.
Yeah. I didn't find any response to that, and I think that the colonial government was not very much afraid of the Muhammadiyah movement, but by this time there was already BNI and Sukarno on the political scene, and the colonial government was much more disturbed by the political movement and not so much by the cultural movements like Muhammadiyah or Daman Siswa or this kind of thing. So no, I don't. We have no sources on that, but I think there was no reaction to the meeting of the Muhammadiyah in Jakarta and the poster. Yeah.
So thank you. Another question I read from Parandika. He typed in the chat box. Thank you, Mr. Kraus, for the speech and presentation. My name is Farandika Daneswara, and I have a question. We all know that art is an exclusive medium which not everyone can enjoy or even see. As in your book entitled Raden Saleh, that Raden Saleh teaches how to paint in the school curriculum. So can art really have an effect on memory and progressive thinking during the national movement, when in fact many Indonesians at that time, we still the lower class and didn't have access to an art? Is the presence of art is more as a complement to a speech which become a more powerful medium for reaching the lower classes?
I think art was not really included in the Dutch colonial curriculum in schools, you know. But it was very much included and very strong in the Daman Siswa school. Daman Siswa schools very strongly influenced from Maria Montessori, this Italian reform, pedagogic leadership, placed a strong focus on art. And some Daman Siswa students were sent to India, to Tagore's university in Sandiniketan, to be educated as artists, and came back to the Daman Siswa school in order to teach art in a different way, not along the Dutch curriculum, but a much more liberated and much more nationalist-orientated way, you know. Unfortunately, although this Daman Siswa teacher, some of them spent 3 or 4 years in Sandiniketan, the University of Rabindranath Tagore. When they came back, they more or less were forgotten, at least forgotten by Indonesian art history. Yeah, we have some names of people. They created artworks in India, and they are still there. But in Indonesia, we hardly know the names. So they have been teaching at the Daman Siswa schools for many, many years. You know, to answer the question, yes, art has been very influential in the curriculums of the private schools, the nationalist schools in Indonesia. The government schools were not so much interested. What they were interested in is not to educate artists. What they wanted to educate people who could draw, how do you call that? Plans for doing buildings, this technical kind of drawing, you know. This was created, and this was part of the Dutch curriculum, but artist development, this was nothing the Dutch really care about.
Thank you, Pak Werner Kraus. And probably we have a final question for you, raised by Guru. He asked about, is there any message for Raden Saleh? I don't know exactly. Raden Saleh gave the painting of Diponegoro to King Willem. So he asked about, is there any message from sending Diponegoro painting to King Willem in the Netherlands?
You mean the painting Penanggapan Diponegoro by
Yes,
Raden Saleh was sent to Holland?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, we know that this happened. We know that Raden Saleh, we have to remember that Raden Saleh, when he returned from Europe to Indonesia, he received a monthly allowance of first 300, later 400 Dutch guilders each month. And the Dutch expected that now and then he paints a painting and as a gift to the king, you know? And he did it maybe 4 or 5 times. He sent 4 or 5 paintings to the Dutch king. And his Penanggapan Diponegoro was one of those paintings. But as I said before, his idea to present this historical painting to the Dutch king, he could have sent him anything, you know, a landscape or some hunting scene or so. No, he painted this historical scene in order to send it to Willem III, the king, the new king. And this, as I expounded, was not by accident. He did it because he wanted to send not only a painting, but a message as well. He sent the message of his anti-colonial feelings. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Werner. So ternyata memang lukisan yang dikirim Raden Saleh kepada Raja Willem itu ada message. Ya, ini adalah perasaan-perasaan yang ada di negara koloni, negara jajahan yang ingin disampaikan Raden Saleh pada Raja Willem, Raja baru pada waktu itu. Jadi, we are now in the final minutes of our discussion session. So before I ask Cisco to end up our discussion today, could you please give us some remarks on concluding sentence before we are closing, Pak Werner?
Yeah, I'm very happy that I had this time to talk about the past, about the Indonesia development of Indonesian nationalism, and about the role Diponegoro was playing in it. But as I said at the end of my talk, you know, the past never ends. Now we live in a time where some of the struggle has to be fought again. And I'm talking about Documenta. I'm talking about Taribating, and I'm Pati and I talking about ruang rupa, the way they are treated now in my country is not acceptable. And in a way, it responds to these old colonial ideas. People claim now they are so enlightened in my country. They claim they're so enlightened and they practice democracy and everything. But when it comes to a problem like the one we are talking about, all this facade collapses, and in a way you still see this inner colonial mindset, which is still very strong in the Western world and in Europe and in America. And I don't have to apologize for it, but I just have to say I'm very sad about this. I'm very ashamed of what is happening right now here. And I hope we find a way to go back to dialogue with each other and find a way to a good solution to the problem. This is what I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you Pak Werner, thank you Pak Peter Carey. Cisco, are you there? Cisco di sana? Cisco? Cisco?
Ya, halo.
Ya, penutupannya tasarkan ke kamu ya.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Pak Werner, Pak Peter Carey, dan juga Mas Daya. Sebelum selesai di acara ini, kita harus mengumumkan 3 penanya atau pemberi komentar terbaik, dan ketiga-tiganya saya mohon Pak Werner memilih, Mas Daya memilih, dan juga Pak Peter memilih. Pak Werner, I invite you to choose the best comment or the question that you feel the best.
Yeah. Well, a comment, as I said before, never forget, we all should never forget history. History is so important, not because of history, but because of our life in the present. And if we forget history, we have no future.
Yeah, for sure, Pak. Pak Werner, you could choose the name that the best question or the best comment in our discussion. Who are you choose? Daya bisa.
Pak Werner, could you choose one of the best question or comment that raised by the audience?
Yes. I like the question about the Bustaman family in Semarang, about the history and about this place and all. For me, this was one of the most interesting questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pak Werner.
Yes, Fajar, Cisco, Fajar.
Oh ya, Bung Wan Fajar, selamat Bung, Anda dipilih oleh Pak Werner pertanyaan terbaik.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Werner. Sami-sami, Mas. Selanjutnya Pak Peter memilih siapa, Pak?
Saya memilih seorang yang tidak muncul, tapi banyak bergerak di belakang, Pak Anies Sudasmo dari Bogor, seorang keturunan dari Bustaman.
Oh ya, terima kasih banyak. Selamat Bapak atau Ibu ya?
Ani.
Bu Ani. Ya, terima kasih Pak.
Saya.
Oh ya, Bu Ani. Bu Ani Sudasmo.
Terima kasih banyak.
Selanjutnya Mas Daya.
Saya memilih Pak Asnan mungkin ya, yang tadi banyak pertanyaan tentang pergerakan Muhammadiyah dan menggunakan lukisan dari Diponegoro.
Oke, terima kasih banyak. Jadi kita sudah dapat 3 pemenang, Ibu Bapak sekalian. Pertama Pak Asnan dari Museum Telik Sandi Jogja, Kemudian ada Bu Ani Sudasmo dari Bogor ya Bu Ani ya.
Benar, Pak.
Nah ya. Kemudian ada Mas Wan Jafar dari Semarang. Jadi Jogja, Bogor dan Semarang ini para pemenangnya. Selamat sekali lagi. Nah, masih adakah Mbak Ines? Mbak Ines dari Penerbit Buku Kompas?
Ya, halo, mahasiswa.
Iya, saya mengundang Mbak Ines untuk bisa menutup forum kita gitu, Mbak Ines.
Mungkin nanti mahasiswa saja yang menutup ya. Saya mungkin bisa menyampaikan beberapa hal gitu terkait diskusi yang sudah berlangsung selama 2 jam ini. First of all, I want to thanks Mr. Werner Kraus and Pak Peter Carey. Terima kasih atas diskusinya hari ini yang sangat sehat. Saya kira untuk teman-teman semua, saya rasa sangat bermanfaat juga bagi banyak cendekiawan dan intelektual di Indonesia. Jadi saya sebagai perwakilan dari Penerbit Buku Kompas yang hari ini menjadi representasi, berharap akan ada banyak sekali ya kajian atau studi lanjutan tentang sejarah Indonesia, nantinya bisa dibukukan dan dibaca oleh orang banyak. Mungkin cukup sekian dari saya, mahasiswa bisa ditutup.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Mbak Ines dan Penerbit Buku Kompas. Ibu Bapak sekalian, kita akan berjumpa lagi di Bincang Bulanan Urip Iku Urub yang ke-8 bulan depan bersama Pak Wardiman Joyonegoro. Beliau merupakan kawannya Pak Peter Carey, Menteri Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan Republik Indonesia tahun 1993 sampai 1998 yang menulis dalam buku Urip Iku Urub mengenai usaha bersama dengan Pak Peter, KITLV, Perpustakaan Nasional mengajukan babat Diponegoro yang akhirnya tembus menjadi Memory of the World UNESCO, warisan ingatan dunia UNESCO mengenai babat Diponegoro. Terima kasih banyak Ibu Bapak sekalian. Thank you so much Pak Werner, Dankeschön Pak. Sehat selalu Pak Peter Carey, terima kasih banyak. Mas Daya, selamat doktoralnya. Para bench. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih Sisko, terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Ibu Bapak semua.
Ya, terima kasih.
Turun, Pak Peter, Mr. Werner Kraus, Mas Sisko, matur suwun.
Sami-sami Mas Wan Jafar.
Bye-bye.
Terima kasih sudah nonton. Jangan lupa like, subscribe, dan share ya.